Sorry.
No, you're okay. Thank you.
Okay. It has the old barn that was torn down quite a few years ago. I'll get into that a little bit more later. And the brick house, which was built, I believe, in 1912, which is the house we're still living in. And then here's a picture that was taken just a few years ago. It has a different barn, same house, but a different barn. Okay? Okay, the McIntyre Century Farm is located about 3 miles west of Dayton. It's along the road to Echo, if any of you are familiar in that area. Daniel McIntyre was the first McIntyre to own our Century Farm, and he was born in Westmoreland County, which I heard somebody else mention that a little while ago. Westmoreland County was a lot bigger place than it is now. He and his family moved to Wayne Township to a farm 2 miles west of Echo. It's about 6 miles from our current farm. Sometime later, Daniel met and married a woman by the name of Martha Elias. She was the daughter of Peter Elias. Now, Peter was the homestead owner of our McIntyre Century Farm. But the farm came up for sale at auction, and Daniel McIntyre bought this farm for $2,161. That was back in 1889. Just as a side note, today, if you go out and buy a new hay baler, you'll probably pay 15 to 20 times that much for hay. So prices have changed. Okay, the farm contains about 114 acres. Now, it is bordered by 2 Elias farms. I mean, they used to be Elias farms. And the current owners of those 2 farms are Tom and Jeannie Grooms. Their land borders our farm. Now, Daniel farmed this farm for about 4 years. He died in 1893. I don't know what happened there, but he only owned the farm for 4 years. Now, his son, John W., or John Wesley McIntyre, took over the farm in 1893, and he was known for having a fine herd of registered Jersey cattle. He also had pigs and sheep and chickens. The present farmhouse, which I showed you a minute ago, it was built by John McIntyre. I think he hired a man to build it in 1912. Before that, Daniel and John and their families lived in a log house on the farm for quite a few years. Now, when I was growing up in this log house, we had pigs and chickens in the log house, but it was torn down in the 1960s. In 1933, the farm was passed on to my grandfather. His name was Herbert McIntyre. He was a son of John W. McIntyre. Herbert continued to keep the farm in a good state of cultivation, but he changed something. He sold the Jersey cows, and he went to raising registered Holstein cows. He also raised pigs and chickens, and my brothers and I, my one brother is here with me tonight, Gary, we had our chores to do morning and evening before school, helping our granddad. And of course, summer vacation, you know where we went for vacation, right on the farm. In 1941, Herbert, my grandfather, had the original barn torn down, and he put up a bigger barn. This barn, which is still in use today, was moved to our farm from an area out by Milton. Now, if you recall, the Mahoning Dam was put in about 1941, and this barn was going to be in the floodplain, and so my granddad found out about it, and he went and bought the farm, and they tore it down, and then they used a truck to haul it from Milton to our place, and then they reconstructed it. I heard my dad tell stories about he drove a truck to made many trips going and picking up pieces of wood and He said he had a flatbed truck, and he said some of the logs were so long, you know, those hand-hewn logs, and they put them along the side of the truck on each side, and they stuck out over the front fenders. And he said he had a pretty big load on one time. He was trying to go up the hill, and his front end was too light, and he couldn't steer the truck. So his one helper, he crawled out on one of those logs and sat out on the front end of the log to put more weight on the front wheel so he could steer the truck. That was the story my dad used to tell. So anyway, the barn was torn down out at Milton. Any of you ever heard of Allen Flats Road? The barn was in that area, in the Allen Flats Road. In 1970, my father, his name was Wayne McIntyre, he bought the farm from my granddad, Herbert, and he continued farming and continued milking Holstein cows, raising pigs and chickens. In 1987, Dad went into semi-retirement. He sold his cows, and then he began just raising crops and selling the crops. And then in 2005, after I retired from teaching school, then my wife, LaDonna, and I, we bought the farm, and we've continued crop farming ever since, raising hay, wheat, oats, and corn. My wife and I live in the same house that my great-grandfather built over 100 years ago. However, we did some extensive remodeling before we moved in. Now, the old houses, as you've probably seen, they have a lot of that old woodwork, dark oak woodwork, and we didn't want to throw away that wood, so we took a lot of the window facings and the door facings to an Amish furniture shop, and he planed it down and refinished it, and then we brought it back to the house and put it back in, and it turned out pretty well. We tried to keep the farmhouse look. So that's what our goal was. Now, some of the first for our farm, the first electric came probably around in the late 1930s. I don't know the exact date. Another thing I remember my dad talking about was they used to generate their own electricity. They had what they call a light plant in the basement of the house. And I don't know if it ran on kerosene or gasoline, I'm not sure, but they would generate their own electricity. I think they had a series of batteries. They'd charge up the batteries and then they'd shut off the generator. But that's what they used to do. The first telephone, somebody mentioned the old party lines. You know, we had one of those. You had to turn the crank to call somebody. I can still remember our call. It was a short, a long, and a short. Now, if you heard that ring, you know that was your call. My uncle up the road, his was a long and two shorts. Of course, now, if you wanted to hear what was going on in your uncle's place, I think those people were called rubbernecks. The first electric milking machines we got in 1943. My aunt used to tell a story. Now, this is my dad's sister. Her name was Helen. She graduated from high school in 1940. She wanted to go on further education, but my granddad said, no, Helen, we need you on the farm to milk cows. But then in 1943, they got electric milkers, and then she was allowed to go on to school. We got our first tractor, a Farmall H, in the early 1940s, and we still have that tractor on the farm. Our first indoor bathroom came in the 1960s. Our first gas well was in the year of 2000. So it takes a lot of work to keep our Century Farm as a working farm. And since I've owned the farm, I've received help from my brothers, especially my brother Gary, who's here tonight. My children, my son Jeff is here tonight, and my grandchildren, 2 of them are here. I've had nephews helping me and some other people. And I'd like to especially thank my brother Gary. He did all the legwork in getting our farm registered as a Century Farm. I didn't know he was doing it, and then a couple Christmases ago, he come walking in with a big package for me, and I opened it up, and it was a big Century Farm sign. I didn't know he was doing it, so thanks again for that. My other son, Steve, has indicated that he would like to own our farm in the future, and I'm hoping the farm remains in the family for many years to come. And thank you.